Dear friends, welcome to EPG Patashala. Today I am Dr. Janardhan, working for NIMANS in the Department of Psychiatric Social Work as an additional professor. Today we are going to learn about etiology and classification of mental disorder under mental health module. So the objective of this module is to understand the human behavior, which is a complex thing, and also need to know about the causes for mental illness, so that it will be easy for us to develop interventions to deal with, to answer some of the problems of families and also the person with mental illness. As I already said, human behavior is a complex, it's difficult to understand, but we are trying to make attempts in terms of giving some theory in order to understand the behavior of the person with mental illness. And our behavior is a result of many past events and circumstances in one's life. Always the present behavior is being governed by our past experiences, which also need to be considered when we are understanding a person with mental illness. Causes of each mental disorder tries to answer question, why do people behave in a maladaptive manner? Different models of understanding mental disorder with its own hypothesis, assumption and treatment methods are there. One school of thought which talks about neurotransmitter and hormonal imbalance. So in order to make it more easier, if we can observe people who are getting married, so we see some sort of a glare in their face. Traditionally we used to say it is part of the marriage rituals. But actually it is one of the chemical being produced in the body which gives that glareness. It may be because of anxiety, happiness. So the chemicals will govern our functioning. So there are a lot of chemicals in the body which cannot be identified. So people say there are thousands of chemicals in the body which are produced. And even though brain is very small, it has more than 1,000 nerves which are connected, and even if you pinch, the pain will be transmitted to brain, and then only we would know that it is pain. So nerves are connected. When we pinch here, one nerve will produce a chemical. When that chemical touches the other nerve, then the pain will be experienced. Similarly, in mental illness, there are some hormones which are going to be produced, hormonal imbalances and chemicals which are going to be produced. Either excess of production of that would lead to a mental illness. So we don't know the reason why these chemicals have been produced, more or less. There are some treatment in order to balance these chemicals, and one way of understanding the mental illness is this chemical imbalance which are going to happen in the body. Some disorders are also related to hormonal imbalances. To give an example, a woman who recently delivered a baby, chances of getting her depression is more. They can experience either is 1 day, 2 day, or it can be for few weeks and 2 months also. It is estimated that almost 50% of the women who have undergone deliveries, they do experience depression, and this depression can be understood mainly because of the hormonal changes which is associated with the birth of a baby. The malfunctioning of this negative feedback, which works in hypothalamic pituitary adrenal cortical axis, this is one part of the brain, actually leads to various kinds of disorder. The sex hormones also lead to some kind of disorder. All our emotions have been controlled by this part of the brain. So when the more chemicals have been produced in that part of the brain, then it leads to emotional problems in person with mental illness. The genetic vulnerability is also another important reason for causing mental illness. Various studies have been conducted which shows that if one parent is having a mental illness, so chances of getting the child will be the 2-digit, which will be around 11 to 15% chances the child would have a mental illness. If both the parents are having mental illness, then the chances would become 2 to 3 times higher. So this is what various research studies which talks about genetic vulnerability. Now another example, if I have to give about genetic vulnerability, is about the Down syndrome. Usually the Down syndrome would follow in families, and a family history, when they have, chances of getting a Down syndrome child is more. Another theory which explains about mental illness being given by Sigmund Freud, which talks about psychoanalytic model, where he talks about the conflict between conscious, subconscious and unconscious mind can lead to mental illness. To give an example, like it is considered as an immediate gratification, ego deals with reality and superego deals with morality principles, and how it can lead to an anxiety. To give an example, if I see a flower, my id would say that I need to pluck the flower, but the ego will say no, it's not good to pluck, let us enjoy as a nature. But superego talks about the morality principles. So once there will be constant conflict between id, ego and superego, the person needs to overcome these conflicts. If the person is not able to overcome such conflicts, it can lead to mental illness. It can lead to emotional problem. It can lead to anxiety related or depression related problems. Freud also talks about psychosexual stages of development, where he has talked about 5 stages of psychosexual development. He concluded with when an individual has conflict during each stage and could not overcome such conflict, it can affect the later part of his life. To give an example, in the oral phase, which is between 0 to 3 years, if the child is not able to overcome the conflict, so it may lead to eating problem at the later stage. Similarly, in other stages also, when the child is not able to deal with the conflicts, so it can lead to mental illness. This is what Freud have talked about. It also focuses on individual inherent capacity, that is love, hope, creativity, values, meaning, personal growth and self-fulfillment. So which is more of an humanistic model, where they talk in terms of each individual have capacities in order to love, hope and having values, meaning, personal growth and self-fulfillment. When these capacities have been challenged, then the person may get as mental illness. Psychopathology is blocking or distortion of personal growth and the natural tendency toward physical and mental growth, it can also happen. Humanistic model, where Roger has stated that each individual exists in his own private world of experience as me, I and myself. Always individual will be thinking on me, I and myself. So most striving of an individual is towards maintaining, enhance our actual self and inner tendencies towards good health and normal condition. Always every individual will be trying towards that, actualizing towards the good health and normal condition. When a threat is perceived to the self, the defenses including a tightening perception and behavior. So we do use a lot of defense mechanisms. When these defense mechanisms are not working, it may lead to mental illness. The humanistic model talks in terms of each individual has its own defense mechanisms, and sometimes defense mechanisms, when it is not working, it may result it as a mental illness. So humanistic model talks in terms of the behavioral model. It attempts to explain the acquisition, modification and extension of all behavior in an individual. And maladaptive behavior is viewed as a result of failure to learn adaptive behavior, learning of ineffective and maladaptive responses. So every individual would be learning adaptive behaviors from the beginning. It's a process of our socialization. Whenever we are faced with problems, we would learn how to adapt and adjust to situation. When we could not adjust and when those learnings have not been adequate enough, then the chances of getting stressed out is going to be more. When we are stressed out, the stress can lead to mental illness also. So it's the behavioral model talk in terms of when the child or an adolescent, when he is not able to adapt to the changes and the expected results from him, chances of getting mental illness is going to be more. So multidimensional integrative approach, right now we have been following, like we are looking at more biological dimension and also biopsychosocial model, gene and environmental condition, and dietary stress model and reciprocal gene environmental model. So all this we are combined together when we are understanding a person with mental illness. So it's not necessary that we should just go with biological dimension alone, biological dimension can be given answer to some of the problems, and most of it will be biopsychosocial model where psychosocial factors also have been contributing towards the mental illness. To give an example from a case study, recently I have been working with a couple who have been having marital problems since the day one of their marriage. In the process of their they have been married since last 15 years now. So in the 15 years they have two children. The elder one who is in now just entered high school, and the younger one is still in the primary school. Because of their marital conflicts, the children are getting affected. So the child right now he is facing problem in the school, mainly because of his learning difficulties. And at home also is not getting adequate support in order to help him out in the remedial way. The child is getting into depression also. So if you have to understand this child, I need to look in terms of how family has been contributing towards the child, and how the school has been contributing, and also how the genetic loading is also been part of it. So unless I have a holistic understanding of all three together, I may not be able to help this child. If I go only with the biological perspective, neglecting the psychosocial, because the person need to go back to the family and go back to community, unless that understanding comes from us, the treatment may not be complete. Just giving medicine itself is not going to be sufficient. In addition to medicine, we also need to have a psychosocial approach, which can come only when we have a better understanding of the person with mental illness from all biopsychosocial perspective. Now again, if I have to talk about gene and environmental interaction, to give another example, I was recently been working with a family where this woman who had a high genetic loading where both the parents had mental illness, and she was able to function, got married, and her marriage also was good for some time, and later husband started having extramarital affair, and then started neglecting her and not providing enough money in terms of managing her own home. So these stresses again led her to get the mental illness. Because of the gene loading also was there, the family history of mental illness also was there, the environment where husband started neglecting her and looking out for an extramarital affair and not contributing enough towards the family. So all these factors has led her to get her mental illness. So we cannot just purely say that it's only because of genes or family history that this lady ended up having mental illness. The environment factor also contributed along with the genes, which led to mental illness. So if you have to understand this stress model, each individual have a capacity to deal with at any time one or two stresses, the person will be able to handle it. The same person has been loaded with too many stresses. Unless the person has learned to cope with the stress, so he may not be able to maintain his mental health. When a person has been faced with 5-6 type of stresses, like having family stress, having work pressure, and then not able to give enough time to his girlfriend, not able to maintain the peer relationship because of too many stresses, then the person chances of getting mental illness is going to be more. So each individual have its own, they have their own stress management way. So we need to work towards the stress management. If we are not able to handle our stress, and if it is going to affect our day-to-day work and also going to govern our emotions, then the chances of this person getting mental illness is going to be more. So this is what stress model talks about. The reciprocal gene environmental model, again, it's a combination of environment and gene which is going to act on one another, and which result into a mental illness. So now let us learn in terms of the classification of mental disorders. Now we have understood why people would get mental illness from a different perspectives, where we looked at genes, chemical perspective, where the chemical changes in the brain would lead to mental illness, how the environment has been contributing towards the mental illness, how the psychosocial factors in the individual life is also been contributing towards the mental illness, and how the stress, when the individual has been exposed to more number of stresses which lead to mental illness, we have understood. So now let us look in terms of classification of mental disorders. So mental disorders are mainly classified into three approaches, where they talk in terms of categorical approaches, dimensional approach, and prototypal approach. So let us learn more about categorical approach. So categorical approach, Kraepelin was the first psychiatrist to classify the disorder from the biological point of view. So he went with the assumption that mental disorders can be diagnosed from the symptoms. Thoughts, feelings, behaviors can be organized into categories representing disorders. All or nothing principle, that is, individual either has a mental disorder or does not have. The symptom used to classify and diagnose mental disorder is both valid and reliable. These are the assumptions Kraepelin has talked about for diagnosing a person with mental illness. The two classificatory system what we are currently practicing is DSM and ICD-10. So Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorder, DSM means. ICD-10 is the International Classification of Diseases. Under DSM classify a multi-axis as there are five axes under which a person would be assessed and then given a diagnosis. Axis 1 talks in terms of mental disorder which has been diagnosed. Example can be schizophrenia, bipolar affective disorder, it can be personality disorder, or it can be depression. Then second, axis 2 is personality disorders, where the borderline personality disorder, it can be anxiety, then paranoid personality disorder, and so many other categories are there. Axis 3 talks in terms of general medical condition, where it can be hypertension or a diabetes. And axis 4 is the psychosocial and environmental factors. And then axis 5 is the global assessment of functioning. So each individual, when we are doing an assessment, we need to come out with axis 1, axis 2, axis 3, 4 and 5 diagnosis category, and then only the interventions can be planned. So this is as per the DSM classification. Whereas in ICD classification, we do not go with axis 1, axis 2, axis 3, 4 and 5 type, but we go more in terms of the classifying the symptoms into disorder. In ICD-10, we have from F0 to F09, which talks about organic including symptomatic mental disorders. So in ICD-10, we start with F00 to F09, where it is organic including symptomatic mental disorder. In organic condition, mainly we see two types of condition, which is like Alzheimer's dementia, where dementia usually it will be an illness seen in elderly people, those who are above 60. The main symptom would be memory loss, and memory loss is going to be a progressive one. Start slowly and then it progresses rapidly, and there is no treatment to cure this illness, but there have been treatment which slow the process. So person may reach to a stage where he would forget how to wear his dress, or he would go to a toilet, lock himself, but then he will forget how to remove the lock. So this is the problem in dementia condition where we see in organic type. The second category what ICD-10 talks about is F10 to F19, which is about mental and behavioral disorder due to psychoactive substance use. Currently we have been talking about dependency not only with regard to substance, but also dependency in terms of the behavior also. Like we are looking at internet addiction, we are also looking at video game addiction, then mobile addiction. So all these categories have been added under that mental and behavioral disorder. The ICD-10 right now it's been addressing about substances uses, mainly alcohol, nicotine and other drugs. where they are looking in terms of how many of them, like what the criteria for diagnosing a person with harmful use, then dependency, then withdrawal state. So they have given a categories in each of this diagnosis. When the person fulfills those categories, then the person will be diagnosed as having either dependency or withdrawal or harmful use. The next chapter in ICD-10 is F20 to 29, which talks about schizophrenia, schizotypal and delusional disorder, which are considered as a severe form of mental illness. So ICD-10 give clear diagnostic criteria for us. So when a person is having so many symptoms in the checklist, can be considered as a person is having schizophrenia. Once the schizophrenia diagnosis has been clarified, then we look in terms of the types of schizophrenia. What type of schizophrenia this person would have? Is it paranoid, hebephrenic, or residual schizophrenia, or is it a simple schizophrenia? We look at the various categories. Then we also have next chapter F30 to F39, which talks about mood disorder. So here in the mood disorder, they mainly give two important categories. One is the manic phase and the other one is the depressive phase. Where a manic phase will be extremely happy, the person would be without any reason, and in the depressive phase the person would be extremely sad, again with or without reason it can be. In individual we would see both the condition like one after the other. So person may be manic for few weeks, then become normal, then again the same person who was a manic would get into depressive episode. So this ups and downs has been called as bipolar affective disorder as per the ICD-10 category. Then F40 to F48, we have neurotic stress related and somatoform disorder, which are called as common mental illnesses, and all this as the name suggests, all these are related to stress related illnesses. When a person is exposed to more number of stresses, the chances of getting common mental illness is going to be more. Then F50 to F59, we have behavioral syndrome associated with physiological disturbances and physical factors. Then F60 to 69, we have disorders of adult personality and behavior, where we look at personalities, various types of personalities each individual would have. And some personalities can be helped with medicine. Some personality related problems can be addressed through psychotherapy and other psychosocial intervention. So this F60 to 69 give us the categories to diagnose the person, when to diagnose this person is having like a paranoid personality disorder, when to diagnose this person as having borderline personality disorder. So all these categories have been given, and once the person fulfills this category, then the diagnosis also will be followed by that. F70 to F79 deals with mental retardation. Currently we don't use the word mental retardation, but we have been using the word intellectual disability. So again it gives us clear direction for us to diagnose person with intellectual disability, whether to give gradation in terms of profound mental retardation, or is it severe mental retardation, or is it moderate or mild borderline. So it gives us guidelines. It not just IQ would determine the mental retardation, there are also other ways to check whether this person is having mental retardation or not. IQ will help us more in terms of categorizing whether this person would fall under either severe mental illness or moderate mental retardation. Severe mental retardation or moderate mental retardation. The next category is F80 to F89, which talks about disorders of psychological development. Then F90 to 98, it's behavioral and emotional problem occurring in children. And then F99 is unspecified mental disorder, when we are not able to put understand the persons with the symptoms in any of this category, then it will be going as unspecified mental disorders. There are, as I earlier started my presentation saying that there are different approaches to understand the mental illness, One is the dimensional approach. Here they categorize dimensional approach in which all cognition, moods and behaviors are quantified in scales rather than assessing it as a mental disorder category. To give an example, we have a Hamilton depression scale, and which assesses the depression, which also help us in finding out the severity of depression. The scales will help us to find out whether this person is having a diagnosable depressive condition, and once we ascertain with the diagnosable depression condition, then it will also help us in understanding the severity of depression. So one way of understanding persons with mental illness is to administer scales through which we come to a diagnosis or conclusion about this person is having mental illness or not. It becomes a process to assess the degree and presence of a particular characteristics. So scales will help us in understanding that. Then higher score represents higher impairment. In Hamilton scale, if it is a higher score, then it means that person is having severe depression. Then we have prototypal approach. This is the third category approach, which is alternative to first two approaches. It identifies some essential characteristics of disorder, and it allows us for a certain non-essential variation that do not necessarily change the classification. With this approach, classifying the disorder by different possible features or properties, any candidate must meet of them to fall in that category. To give an example, in schizophrenia, if you have to diagnose a person with schizophrenia, there should be some minimal symptoms which can be like in terms of visual hallucination or auditory hallucination is one of the criteria to diagnose person having a schizophrenia. And also the thought process need to be looked at, whether the person is having formal thought disorder can also be again put under schizophrenia. When we are looking at mood disorders, it will be more, the symptoms are more associated in terms of the mood, whether the person's happiness or sadness is determining the mood disorder. Whereas in schizophrenia, it is the hallucination and the formal thought disorder which will determine the schizophrenia. So prototypal approach, we are looking in terms of classifying the symptoms either into mood disorders or into schizophrenic symptoms and then give a diagnosis. And similarly, similar approach is also being used under common mental disorders, where they look in terms of anxiety related problems and depressive related problems, and then come to conclusion whether the person is having anxiety. Once the anxiety is being confirmed, then the further classification has been done. So in summary, if you have to understand the classification of mental disorders, I would like to show a triangle where it has been divided into three parts. So the first part talk about organic mental disorder, the second part talk about severe mental disorder, the third part is common mental disorder. In the third line I have drawn and then again I have striked it, and then I have written normal population as the last category. So why I have drawn and then striked it is, so we all have chances of getting common mental disorder. We may get common mental disorder and again we can come back and lead a normal life. If you have to understand the prevalence in terms of the common, like all these categories, so if I have to take organic mental disorder, the prevalence which would be around 0.5% population would have organic mental disorder, where it's mainly dementia and delirium related problems. The second category of severe mental disorder would be 1% of the population would have a severe mental disorder. And the last category of common mental disorder, it is 5 to 15% as per the WHO studies. Even if I take 5% of the population, if I have to project this figure for the Indian thing, 5% of Indian population are having common mental disorders who would require mental health intervention. So we don't know currently whether the country is geared enough in terms of providing mental health services to all this percentage of population who require immediate attention. A rough calculation would indicate around 50 lakh of population with organic mental disorder require intervention, and 1.2 crore of persons with severe mental illness again would require mental health intervention. If I have to just take the 5% of the population who are having common mental disorder, it is going to be another 6 crore of population in the country who require mental health intervention, which need to be provided urgently so that their mental health can be taken care, and once their mental health have been taken care, they are going to become more productive and contribute towards the society. Till now we have understood the causes for mental illness. So we have looked at causes from the various theoretical perspective, and then we are also looked in terms of the classificatory system available, where we have a DSM category and then the ICD-10 category. In the country mainly we follow ICD-10, and some places we also follow DSM category. And then we have looked in terms of how these organic mental disorder, severe mental disorder and common mental disorders, and now population, how it's been projected for the Indian population we have understood, and also in terms of the prevalence of all these disorders we have understood. And thank you.